So I'd like to call the Law Amendments meeting to order. In the absence of both the chair and the vice chair, I would look for a motion from one of the members to appoint someone to chair this meeting. Mr. Irving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we ask Minister Elena Diab to chair this meeting this morning.
All those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Ms. Diab.
Good morning. Bonjour. So just a reminder that photographs and taping is only permitted by members of the press gallery. Beyond that, we will proceed. We've got two bills this morning. The first is Bill 133, Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act, and I will call the first and only presenter on this bill, and the names that I have here is Cynthia Eisner, Janet Gallant, and Dr. Stephen Bede, to please come forward. I will keep time, as I'm sure you've all been told, so, and we'll let you know, and we'll let the questionnaires know as well. So when you're ready, please confirm your names and where you're from and proceed.
Stephen Bede, Medical Director of the Donation Program.
Janet Gallant, I'm the Program Manager for Legacy of Life and Critical Care Organ Donation.
Cynthia Eisner, Director of Critical Care Central Zone and Policy and Planning for Critical Care at Nova Scotia Health Authority.
Good morning. We would like to thank the Law Amendments Committee for the opportunity today to come and speak about Bill 133, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. We have been overwhelmed by the public response to this new bill. The support and the concerns have been equally acknowledged by our colleagues in the media. We want to take the time to dispel some of the myths and misconceptions that Nova Scotia may have about organ and tissue donation, as well as the bill itself. One of the most important points we want to make is this legislation is about life-saving organ and tissue donation for the purposes of transplantation. This law is not about donation of a person's body for anatomical research. It also states explicitly that this is not about donation of reproductive material for the purposes of reproductive medicine or science. We will specifically focus on the presumed consent or opt-out portion of the new act. What this means is that every Nova Scotian who dies is considered to be an organ and tissue donor unless they have registered to opt out. Our current system is known as an opt-in approach. We are essentially revising this premise and asking Nova Scotians to identify when they choose not to be a donor. Additionally, there will be a clear process that enables Nova Scotians to specify which organs or tissues they wish to opt out of for the purpose of donation and transplantation. In many opt-out jurisdictions, next of kin still have a conversation with the healthcare team. This is what the process is expected to look like in Nova Scotia. A conversation to affirm the patient's consent will occur with our healthcare team members, and information that a person has registered can be accessed and shared by the team with the family. This bill provides that all Nova Scotians are organ and tissue donors unless they opt out of this process. We want to impress upon the committee and the general public that we, the general public, are 6 times more likely to need a transplant than to become an organ donor. Furthermore, the opportunity for organ donation is rare, occurring in 2 to 5% of all end-of-life experiences. The current process enables all Nova Scotians to be clear about what organs and tissues they wish to donate. This opportunity will not change with the new legislation in Bill 133.
Over the next 12 to 18 months, we will be working with government to finalize the processes that will exist to support this law. We want to build an explicit and obvious process that contains culturally sensitive and inclusive methods for choosing what organs or tissues a Nova Scotian wishes to donate. Likewise, for Nova Scotians who wish not to be donors, the process for opting out will be done with the same amount of consideration. Polling of the general public has consistently demonstrated that over 90% of Canadians have said they support organ and tissue donation. Indeed, in Nova Scotia, we have had a donor registration rate of over 50% in recent years. We know that when polled by Ipsos Reid, Canadians did identify that their registered consent would only be enacted in approximately 59% of these situations. This disparity is concerning and supports changing our opt-in to an opt-out registry. Furthermore, our intent to donate registries have not translated into actual donations. Canada and Nova Scotia have had some of the lowest rates of donations across the world. As an essential first step to system reform for organ and tissue donation, Bill 133 is not only giving hope to over 100 individuals in Nova Scotia waiting for a transplant, but it also gives hope to those individuals who want to ensure that their life's legacy is concluded with the gift of organ and tissue donation. We are pleased to see that the introduction of this bill has received the attention of Nova Scotians and the public, and that people are having clear and honest conversations about what their wishes are. Thank you.
Dr. Bede, did you want to say?
I think my colleagues have more than adequately represented the position of our program. I simply made myself available if there was medical questions, because I feel like I've talked about this plenty.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for all three of you. I'll keep a speaker list, and I will start with MLA McGuire, who has notified me he'd like to pose a question.
Thank you for being here today and for being part of this very important piece of legislation. I had two questions that continuously come up for me. I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding from some people in the general public on what this means. One of the questions that came up that I've heard several times now is, how will this law impact people that don't have the mental capacity to make the choice, and also religious and cultural beliefs?
So there are definitely situations.
I think I'm supposed to.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
Was it Ms. Eisner? Ms. Eisner.
Thank you. Apologies. There are stipulations within the legislation for individuals who lack capacity. Essentially, they will not be included as presumed to be donors. Likewise, for individuals under the age of majority, they are not included to be presumed to be donors unless registering themselves or their parents registering them. And for individuals who feel this is not consistent with their beliefs, for whatever reason that is, there will be a clear method for them to either opt out of specific organs and tissues, if that's not consistent with their beliefs, or organ donation and tissue donation in general.
Thank you. One follow-up.
Thank you. The other question, and kind of something that's been kind of inferred on, especially on social media and stuff like that, and we've heard it a little bit in debate, is that it's taken away people's right to choose. Like an opt-out takes away people's right to choose. So how do you respond to that?
Ms. Eisner?
So we're essentially reversing the current premise that we have, and I think you've heard that from us today. You've probably heard that from our group at Nova Scotia Health Authority over the last week since the announcement came out from the Premier and Minister Delory. We're essentially reversing our choice to opt in to an opt-out choice. I don't feel that this legislation removes an individual's choice. The choice is very clear, and actually it's becoming more explicit in many ways. So not only do you choose either not to be an organ or tissue donor, but you can clearly choose what organs or tissues you choose not to donate for yourself when you die.
Perfect, thank you. MLA Chender?
Thank you. Thanks for being here to present on this bill today. It was nice to see someone coming to speak to it, and it's helpful. I'm curious what you foresee as the impact, in, let's say, a 3 or 4 year window, or however you're measuring that, of this change in terms of people waiting, and how that will be different with this change.
I think they're looking at you, Dr. Bede, your colleagues, I mean.
Yeah, I think they are. Well, the short answer is that nobody can know for sure, but we're prepared to learn from other jurisdictions. If you look at what this bill discusses, clearly the opt-in option is very high profile, and it should be. But it's not the only part of the bill. And as we all heard the Premier say on multiple occasions, the enactment of this bill is going to require that the system is supported to be able to deliver. And so when we talk about prospect for improvement and change in the system, the investment in changing how the donation system works presently to facilitate this act, the way the transplant program will change and our tissue bank colleagues will be supported as well. Collectively, the investment in the donation and transplant program to enact this act is certainly going to increase donation in this province. The specific impact that the presumed consent clause will have on ultimate success is hard to tease out. If you look at the experience of Spain, for example, which everyone wants to look to, the law that they had in place supported presumed consent from 1979 onwards. Their donation rates were completely flat for a decade. In 1989, they basically said, we have this law in the books, but what we really need to do is develop system changes that support that act. And what you started to see then was very, very dramatic increase in donation rates. The Wales experience is relatively recent and new. A new publication just showed that their consent rates have gone up ballpark 30%. We have examples around the world of other countries that have been successful with this kind of legislation, a couple that haven't. But one of the common features in a successful program, and in general we're talking about a 20 to 30% increase in donation rates when this comes in place, is that the law is enacted, but the system to support the law also evolves and improves. And we have the commitment to enhance our system as well as to support a new law. And I'm very comfortable saying that if we review where we are in 5 years, we're expecting to be at least 30% ahead. And if we were 50% ahead, I wouldn't be shocked. If you look at the UK, which basically identified their system as being, in fact, overall a lower performing system than Canada, and that was a crisis, and they said we got to change this. They've had about a 50% increase overall in around 5 years. So it can be done, and we're expecting a significant increase over the, say, next 5 years.
And just a quick follow-up. How do you see that correlating with people now waiting for organ and tissue donations? So does that mean we don't have a wait list, or we have extra supply when people find themselves in that medical crisis, or where does that sit versus the need?
I'd love to be able to say that the transplant wait list is going to go away. It's not. There's virtually no chance that the transplant wait list is going to go away, with a couple of explanations. One of them is that as medical science advances, as expectations of the public change, there are people who are being considered for transplantation as a medical option that some years ago would never have been put on the list. So there's more and more people going on to the wait list, so that even if our donation rates increase, the number of people who are in the queue, if you will probably go up, so a gap will exist. But will we collectively increase the number of patients in this province that are getting optimal care? I certainly expect that to happen. The other part of this whole sort of question is sort of the supply-demand part. So we know demand is likely to go up, and we're expecting supply to increase as well, but predicting whether we're going to specifically narrow that gap is hard to say.
Thank you. So we only have 3 minutes, less than that left. So MLA Lohr.
Thank you for the presentation, and I think it's very interesting statistic that you're 6 times more likely to need an organ than become a donor. That's very telling. My question is, we see the healthcare system now, I mean, the Valley Regional has a reported 3,000 elective surgery backlog. We have lack of anesthesiologists in Yarmouth Hospital just recently reported. So we see many stresses in our system, and this will create new opportunities for surgeries and new demands. Like, what new investments do you see as being needed to meet meet this demand given the circumstances that we are having in healthcare now? I'm not sure who would answer that. But.
Either one of you, would you like, are you nodding your head, Ms. Eisner? Go ahead.
As part of our assessment, we have been looking at what the impact to the system will be, and I think we've just heard from Dr. Bede. You know, when we look at our best estimates for increases over the next 3 to 5 years, we do have somewhat of a predictive model based on what other jurisdictions have experienced. Certainly, we appreciate and know that as more public education and healthcare awareness comes through, there will be an increase in donations and then subsequently transplantations. The other thing that we know that we will help offset are some of those medical care treatments that individuals waiting for transplants actually need. So as more people do receive a transplant, that's less strain on the system. Certainly, part of our commitment is looking to analyze the impact at all local centers as this increases. And we're in the final stages of really trying to determine what that impact will look like at some of the areas that are having increased wait times and pressures.
So can I just say, but it will definitely need more investment, increased investment in healthcare to achieve the higher transplant rates, correct?
We're actually just in the final stages of examining that, yes.
So we're less than a minute left. Ms. MLA Zan?
Thank you. Just a quick question then. So you had said that 90% of Canadians believe in the organ and tissue donation, but only about what percentage was it that actually do give in Canada?
Dr. Bede?
In Nova Scotia, roughly 53 to 54% have indicated on their registry their intent to be donors. In other provinces in Ontario, that's in the high 20% range, maybe 30. In BC, it's in the 20-something% range. So there's a gap between what people clearly say when they're asked and what they've actually done in terms of registering. And
which is why this would help, because it would get rid of that problem that they would already be a donor unless they opt out.
It would contribute to the solution, yes.
So one other just quick question then is, so people are presumed donors, do they only harvest the organs if there's a need for it at that moment, or do they save them for the future?
I'm going to allow that because it's one we were all wondering. Dr. Bede.
We would procure organs from a potential organ donor if there was a medical suitability. So anybody that was deemed a potential donor would have to meet specific clinical criteria, and then having been assessed as a potential donor, the organs that they might donate would be dependent on their particular history. For example, somebody could have horrendous lung disease, but their kidneys are perfectly fine. So they're not going to be a lung donor, but their kidneys could certainly be used or something like that. And given the demand in Canada right now, with the exception of some rare circumstances where it's a unique blood group or whatever, there would be a need for just about any organ that could be donated. We have been challenged by logistics more than anything else.
Thank you. So, Ms. Eisner, you wanted to add something?
I just want to add that the answer is yes. The direct answer is yes. So organs are only recovered when they can be transplanted and identified into another individual. They're not recovered and then stored for a later date. So as Dr. Bede described the process, an individual is identified as a donor. We then identify what organs are healthy and safe for transplantation, and then there is an identified recipient, and that organ is recovered for that specific recipient. Those organs are not recovered and stored for a later date. They just would not be safe for transplantation.
So on behalf of the committee and all MLAs, I want to thank you for coming to speak to this bill. We always want to thank everybody that comes in, but particularly with the topic and a subject that is quite frankly new to a lot of us. Certainly it's new to me, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Irving, you have a motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm actually very proud on behalf of this committee to put a motion forward that Bill number 133, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act, be referred back to the House without amendment.
Do I need a second? Thank you very much. We have a motion on the floor. All in agreement, please indicate by saying aye. Contramanded? Thank you very much. Motion passed, I think unanimously. Thank you. We will now proceed with Bill 136, Financial Measures 2019 Act. And I am going to ask if Mr. Tim Blades is in the audience to please come forward. Thank you very much.
Should I just start?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Just be forewarned, I'm allotted 10 minutes. I intend to take every second of the 10 minutes. And it's
Not a problem. I will definitely keep time, but take your 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Tim Blades. I am an income assistance recipient, and I'm here to speak on behalf of BRAG. That's the Benefits Reform Action Group. BRAG is a group of recipients and community advocates fighting for a dignified life for employment support and income assistance recipients and changes to the ESIA program here in Nova Scotia. I would like to talk to you a bit about life on the system and express some feelings about the current ESIA transformation that has been going on. In March of 2016, I attended what was called a First Voice consultation. This was part of a series of public consultations put on by the Department of Community Services. The conversation was lively. People were speaking openly about not having enough money, too much paperwork being lost at a DCS office, caseworkers being hard to contact, rude caseworkers, not having enough food. It's hard to feed yourself when some recipients have as little as $27 left for the month after paying bills. It's little wonder that 50% of all Feed Nova Scotia clients are income assistance recipients. Some people even had positive things to say, how they had a caseworker that really tried to help. I was buoyed by the open conversation and the presence of the executive director of the ESIA program, Mr. Brandon Grant. I felt that maybe the Department of Community Services was finally listening and that proper help was finally coming to Nova Scotians who so desperately need it. I sit here today to let you know that I no longer have that optimism. This current welfare transformation has promised many things for recipients, including having basic needs met, better control over your life, social inclusion, better help with employment, better safety and security, and better implementation of services. As for basic needs, recipients only receive funds for a phone if they have a note from their doctor stating that they have a medical need. This is ridiculous because how is a recipient supposed to be in contact with their caseworker or anyone else if they don't have a phone? One would also argue that a phone is necessary for social inclusion, to be in contact with family or friends. A phone is currently classified as a special need and will continue to be classified as such, even with the ESIA transformation. On the topic of social inclusion, let's talk about the new annual bus passes. I think we can agree that transportation is a basic need, not a medical need or special need. Previously, transportation expenses were typically $20 for a sheet of bus tickets or $78 for a monthly bus pass. And just like phone expense, you had to prove medical need in order to get these funds. However, that is the past. ESIA recipients and HRM now receive an annual bus pass. This pass is called an X pass. It is not classified as a medical or special need, and it has the recipient's picture and name on it. When the pass first came out last summer, some recipients reported being harassed and stigmatized over having the pass. Nonetheless, one can say that the annual bus pass is a great thing. especially for those who received no transportation expense previously. ESIA recipients and HRM now have more freedom to travel. The annual bus pass is not an improvement for all. Those who live in rural areas where there is no bus service receive 20 cents per kilometer of travel in terms of travel expense. Here in the HRM, those who previously received the $78 monthly transportation expense are actually worse off due to the new annual pass. You see, welfare recipients in Nova Scotia live 30 to 60% or more below the poverty line. Shelter rates range from $223 for a single person who is a boarder to a maximum of $620 for a family of 3 or more. There's also the personal allowance of $275. I am a single person who boards. When I was receiving a $78 monthly transportation expense, I had the option of buying a sheet of bus tickets and using the remaining $58 on food or another expense. When the new annual passes came out, everyone on ESIA and HRM lost their transportation expenses. I am down $78. But what about the increases, you might say? Well, after years and years of transformation, in January 2020, ESIA recipients will see an increase which will vary between $11 and $40 monthly. This increase will be bundled with the current shelter allowances and the current personal allowance and will collectively form the retitled standard household rate. Even if I get the $40 increase, I'm still worse off. There is paperwork out by the Department of Community Services that indicates single disabled people will be ahead $83 a month due to the transformation. My colleagues and I reject this for 2 reasons. First, the example includes the historic $20 increase to personal allowance in 2016. For reference, the ESIA rates were frozen for 3 years prior to that increase and have been frozen since. Secondly, the example includes the increases to the poverty reduction credit, which is received quarterly by single Nova Scotians who have an income of less than $12,000. It's unfair to include the poverty reduction increase, as someone living in such poverty would lack the ability to ration the quarterly payments over 3 months, as the example would indicate. As I've mentioned, I attended the First Voices consultation. We were given a handout, a roadmap to the new system. In the middle of that map, in big letters, are the words, "Your voice matters." But does my voice really matter? Are the people in power really listening? On the one hand, there's some evidence to indicate that they are. I mean, at one time not long ago, if an ESIA recipient were in receipt of child support, the government would take 100% of that money from the recipient. That policy ended in August 2018. Now recipients get to keep all of their child support. And I had a hand in ending that policy. I wrote about that policy. I gave a speech outside the legislature calling for an end to that policy. I went door to door with others with a petition in hand.
Mr. Blades, 2 minutes, but with the acceptance of the members on the committee, I can give you up to 5 more if you will not ask, if that's okay with you and them.
Okay. Oh, yes, please. Thank you. In 2006, and I went door to door with others with a petition in hand, listening to people's stories of the punitive, unjust system. In 2016, at the First Voices consultation I attended, over half the group, including myself, had issues with one particular caseworker. People complained that he was rude, wouldn't return calls, and made cuts to people's benefits without giving a written reason why. In 2018, going door to door with the child support petition, I learned that the same caseworker is still employed and still making cuts to benefits and not providing reasons for the cuts in writing, being rude to recipients despite being complained about. We also have We've also been promised that with this transformation, employees of the Department of Community Services would treat clients better. While many caseworkers are great and caring, many recipients are still waiting for that better treatment to kick in. While the 100% child support clawback has ended, other 100% clawbacks remain, namely the clawback on ESIA recipients who are self-employed and the clawback on employment insurance monies. Will the Department of Community Services be ending these clawbacks? I hope so, but it remains to be seen. In addition to being a recipient and a member of BRAG, I am also a member of CASAR, the Community Agenda for Social Assistance Adequacy and Reform. Both groups have requested to meet with the DCS Minister and the Premier. Both groups were instead offered an opportunity to meet with the ESIA Program Executive Director, Mr. Brandon Grant. CASAR declined the offer to meet Mr. Grant, and after 2 meetings with Mr. Grant, BRAG followed suit. BRAG members feel that nothing was accomplished with their 2 meetings with Mr. Grant, and further meetings would be pointless. In addition, when BRAG members wrote letters to the Premier and DCS Minister asking for an end to the EI and self-employment clawbacks, we received a form letter response from Mr. Grant outlining the other transformations that have been made, including the end of the child support clawback. We are told that our voices matter, but how can we really believe that when those in power refuse to meet with us? I ask this as a recipient, an advocate who is fighting for change, and a voter. Why are they not meeting with us? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Ms. Zann, well, we've got almost 3.5 minutes, so.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your presentation, and your voice was heard today, and you did extremely well. I really enjoyed your presentation, and it really brings up a lot of very disturbing facts.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. So to begin with, what would you suggest would be a sum that would be a good sum that could look after your needs in entirety right now? Like you said, you're getting a certain amount and it's not enough. Yeah. But for somebody in your situation, for instance, how much would be enough to cover everything? And I would suggest maybe the bus passes should not be taken out of your the amount that you're trying to live on.
Well, yes, with the announcement of the bus pass, I found that was left out of the conversation, that people were actually losing money. Again, not everyone had a transportation expense before, but those who did have a transportation expense lost that money. As I said, I'm personally down $78 a month, and the maximum increase I will see from this transformation is $40. Really? Yeah.
That's all?
That's the maximum. That there's a table published in the Nova Scotia Advocate that had the caseload segmented, and that's another thing I didn't touch, but there's apparently going to be caseload segmentation where certain people will get $11 and other people deemed disabled will get $40. And there's different, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there's different rates depending on what segmentation you're in. But as far as, I understand that you've heard from Vince Calderhead yesterday.
Yes, and another woman as well, and she said that about $1,500 a month was what she needed.
Yeah, it's very telling that a person could be 64 and living on income assistance here in Nova Scotia, and the province says $810 is enough for you to live off. That's the maximum that a single disabled person, not counting special needs if they have any, a single disabled person age 64 would get $810 maximum a month. But then when they're 65 and they're on old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, it's, I think, $1,600. So it's telling. I never understood why there was such a difference there. a person who's 64 and disabled gets $810, and a person who's 65 and disabled would get $1,600. So I've never understood that.
I'd just like to say one thing before we move on, which is bus passes, when I first came into government, were given to everybody, and those were taken away in 2013, 2014.
Yes, in my week on welfare, Jackie makes that same note that you just made.
Jackie Torrance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the day when she was on welfare in the 90s, everyone got a bus pass.
Right.
And now, until they had the annual bus, and that's another thing, it went from being a medical need, but when the price was right, everyone got it.
Right. Like it used to be that you could get a bus pass and you didn't have to prove that you had a medical need to use that bus
Ms.
pass.
Ann?
Right. Thank you.
So, Mr. Blades, thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
very much appreciate you coming. The information that you shared, I assure you, is valuable for us to hear directly from you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Claire McNeil. Good morning. Yeah. Please proceed.
So
Thank you.
I had prepared something. I don't know if it's made its way to you all. Okay. So, and those are, I don't plan to read my notes that I brought here today, but I'm here to talk to you about the human rights approach to budget analysis. And it's something that's happening across the world. Many governments are looking at it very carefully, and I think it's something that Nova Scotia might want to consider. So I'll just introduce myself first. My name is Claire McNeil, and I'm employed with the Housing Legal Aid Service, and I'm here on behalf of the Disability Rights Coalition. And the coalition is a group of over 32 disability groups and many, many individuals who are committed to the rights of people with disabilities in Nova Scotia. So the DRC was formed many, many years ago following a government report that recommended the creation of new community-based supports and services for people with disabilities. That was back in 2001. That was something called the Kendrick Report. But that report followed many, many government reports calling for deinstitutionalization, calling for more community-based supports and services for people with disabilities in this province. So it's not a new creation. It's been going on for decades, in fact. And the other side of this is that the group is important, felt that an advocacy group like this was important because the interests and voices and needs of people with disabilities are too easily disregarded by policymakers, by budget writers, by people in power. And so that's the other reason why this group came together. So the government's priorities and policies will be realized through this budget that you've been asked to approve. And so the point of us coming here before you, all of us who've been coming for the last several days to talk about this bill, the Financial Measures Act, is to talk to you about what are the implications of this budget. What does it in fact do? So we've all seen, the PowerPoints and the bulletins and the shorthand, but what does it actually do? And if we look at this budget, for people with disabilities who need community-based supports and services, that's their bridge to participate fully in life in the community. It's a basic thing. It's something that we all take for granted, that there's going to be a place for us in this community. But for people with disabilities who need supports and services, that requires government intervention, that requires budget, that requires money. So if we look at this budget, we ask ourselves, what does this do for the most powerless people in our society, people with disabilities who are also poor, who can't afford to provide for those supports and services themselves? We find that, in fact, it creates no new community-based options for those individuals. And so in the materials that I've given you some of the, what I call the facts, which is the background to this situation. You may say, well, that's not so bad, you know, this year, next year, whatever, can't do everything every year for everybody. We have to make choices, Budgets are tough things to come out with. We've got to make choices. Not everybody's going to be included. But this follows many, many decades of people with disabilities not being included. So this is a turning point for this legislature, because now we know that this is a human rights violation. This is a violation of people's equality rights. This is discriminatory. How do we know this? Because we have a decision from a board of inquiry 1 month ago that told us this. In the case of 3 individuals who were unnecessarily institutionalized in this province for many, many years, a board of inquiry has found that that is discrimination based on disability. You ask yourself, how would you feel if that's all that there was for you? If you were poor and you had no resources? We did away with the poorhouse. We did away with the poorhouse many decades ago because we recognized how discriminatory that was. But you know what? They still exist for people with disabilities in this province, and we call them institutions. We have names for them: regional rehabilitation centers, adult residential centers, residential care facilities. We have nice names for them, but they're the same. They're institutions. And the other side of this is that every single one of those individuals who are in those institutions, the Department of Community Services has assessed them and has found them not only eligible, but that they could benefit from life in the community. We know this. It's not because they're not capable, it's because we're not capable. And in particular, right now, with this budget, you have the opportunity to do something about that. Or you can participate in the continued, ongoing human rights violation against people with disabilities in this province. So that's kind of the stark choice. I think in approving a budget, you are participating in a human rights violation because it is only the budget that stands in the way. We know what needs to be done. The government has been involved in a transformation process, but even before that, decades of reports have told us what needs to be done. It's not rocket science. And, this government endorsed something called the roadmap. And the roadmap actually is just that. It tells you how to get from A to B, how to create these community-based supports and services for people with disabilities so they can get out of these institutions, so they can get out of their parents' basements, so they can have a proper life and participate. Let's look at the Human Rights Act. It says, an equal opportunity to enjoy a full and productive life. That's all they're asking for. It's pretty basic. It's not a knee replacement. It's a basic access to life in the community that all of us take for granted, and none of us would allow to be denied to any person that we're close to. So I'm just suggesting that if we look at the solution here, the solution is budgetary, because we know that that's what's standing in the way of the Department of Community Services providing the kind of supports and services that they have identified are necessary. They know what's necessary. They've identified that. It's in the roadmap. So what's the next step? The next step is the legislature to make good on that promise and to provide that. So we're calling for a multi-year funding commitment through the budget to implement the promises that you folks made, or the Premier made in 2013, and the government as well, to create those community-based options. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the human rights approach to budget analysis. But I think it is something that is being recognized across the world as really important in any kind of budgetary consideration. So you come here and all kinds of people are asking for different things, but how do you prioritize? Well, one way you prioritize is you look at what are the interests at stake. And here it's a human rights issue, and it's an issue of discrimination. So discrimination Equality rights requires us to take immediate action. This isn't a partisan issue or a political issue. This is a human rights issue. It affects all of us. So it doesn't matter what political stripe you are, you're all equally part of the solution here in terms of rectifying this. So looking at it from a human rights perspective is essential to understanding what your obligations are in passing this budget.
Okay, perfect. You're at 10 minutes, and MLA Shender.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. Thanks for coming today, and thank you. I think it's a very helpful frame, and I think it's one that fits a lot of the issues we're facing in the budget and otherwise. As you say, it's not a partisan frame. It's about people's basic human rights and the legal instruments that govern us. I wonder if you could comment a little further on two things. One is the human rights lens that you're talking about. We also hear about a gender lens being applied to legislation. But without rigor, it becomes a bit meaningless. Like, we can talk about it, but I wonder if you have a sense of what does a system look like, where that human rights lens is applied? Do we go line by line through the budget and look at our, human rights code? So that's one question. I mean, genuinely, I'm interested in how to operationalize this concept. And then I guess the second one is, you have said your ask is a multi-year funding commitment along the lines of the roadmap, but what would a meaningful first step look like in terms of that funding commitment?
Ms. McNeil?
Two-part question, so I'm going to try and remember both parts. Well, I think I can't speak to all the issues in terms of discrimination that might be engaged by this budget, but I can speak to the disability supports program. So we can go to the briefing notes that we've been provided by the government as to what's included in the funding, because they've identified that there's going to be a funding increase to the disability supports program. So we go and look at what that consists of, and what we see is it consists of no new community-based options, placements for people, places for people to live in the community. So that's the key, because that's the part that the Human Rights Board of Inquiry focused on in terms of what was the nature of the discrimination, what was the nature of the government's treatment of peoples with disabilities in terms of this violation of human rights. And what we see is that it's a lack of meaningful access to social services. And you may say, well, social services, isn't that required under our law that people be entitled to social services? And it's true, it is. But in fact, in its practices and policies, our provincial government has not respected that for decades, since at least 1995. So that's a very clear-cut lens that we can put on this budget. We can say, does it change, does it create the kind of, and we know there's over 1,500 people on the wait list, so we know there's a need. So does it open the door to those people being able to meaningfully participate in the life of the community as required by the Human Rights Act? And what we see is it does not. For those people who are being unnecessarily institutionalized, who are on wait lists, who are in places where they don't want to be and don't belong, this budget does nothing for them. So what would be a good first step? Well, a good first step would be, we've heard from Ms. Lill, who spoke on the Community Homes Action Group, who've said that, a good first step would be 25 new small option placements this year. That's a good, hard number. I hesitate because this government announced the creation of 8 new small options placements 3 years ago, and as of today, we've only seen 2 of those. So it's not so much a matter of making announcements, it's designating the funding. And the way this program works, you can't just designate a one-off. It needs to be programmatic, and that's what the roadmap said. It laid out a time frame. It laid out steps. It says, here's how we're going to get from A to B. So for government to do a one-off really doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with what it said previously, because what it says previously is we need to have a focused, systematic program to address this problem. I'm hoping there's other questions.
We've actually reached the time, unless, so, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for
You've given
taking
us
time to hear from me.
something to think about, which is a different approach than we,
Yeah,
and that's, I think that was the basis for the presentation. Thank you.
it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Irving?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that Bill number 136, the Financial Measures Act 2019, be referred back to the House without amendment.
Thank you very much. We have a motion on the floor. Would all those that are in agreement please signify by saying aye? Contrary? Motion carried. Thank you very much. This adjourns today's session. Appreciate all your cooperation. I wish everything runs like this. Thank you very much.